This is what I told him. This is what I told him. This is what I will tell him. Geschmack to be a yid, geschmack to be a yid. La 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 la, geschmack to be a yid. La 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 la. La 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 la. Someone once came over to me and asked me what's it like to be a yid. Someone once came over to me and asked me what's it like to be a yid. This is what I told him. This is what I told him. This is what I told him. Da, 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 da.
Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. That was Moshe Storch, our musical director, when we have people getting together to be on camera together. We miss having Moshe here on camera. We'll see what we can do. Maybe we could get him in here for this CU next week when we finish Tractate Shabbos. That song was Geschmack to be a Yid. It's Geschmack. That's a Yiddish word. It's tasty. It's sweet. It's beautiful to be a Yid. Yid is Yiddish for Jew. We are Yidden. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us today? Yehudit Sobel says shalom from Florence, South Carolina. James Roth is with us from Indianapolis. Melissa Eitel Jurin, good evening from Great Neck, New York. Stephen Giger says shalom from Dover, New Hampshire. Vaughn Billow says shalom from Fremont, Ohio. Leah Meza says hello from Miami. Ed Berg says shalom from Galloway, New Jersey. Randy Lieberman Herman, shalom from Florida. Ed Berg, your job is to shed light, not to master. Yes, sir. Bill Eldridge, shalom from St. Louis. I'm traveling home to help look after my grandmother for a few months. Prayers for uninteresting travel. May you have no novelties in your trip, and we should only hear good news about your grandmother. Josh Diaz is with us from New York City in Westchester. Elizabeth Bourgeois Catching says howdy from Texas. Lynn is with us from North Texas, and Neil here from Virginia. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? I'll just mention right here, I love to be a Yid. Like Moshe sang, it's Geschmack to be a Yid. Now we've got these t-shirts. If you haven't seen our merchandise, Nina will put the link in the comments. Shop at accidentaltalmudist.org. We have a bunch of really cool stuff. T-shirts, pillows, blankets, mugs, sweatshirts with the logo. They're super cool, and it helps support our nonprofit organization. When we put this out yesterday, somebody said to me, how dare you make a t-shirt that says Yid? Don't you know that Yid was a term used to insult Jews? It's an offensive term. Now, that is just tragic that somebody would feel that. She's Jewish, and it's so sad that she would feel that way. I understand. I'm sure in the past there were Jew haters, Yid haters, who used this word to make fun of us. But Yid is a Yiddish word, and it's the Yiddish word, let me turn that off. It's the Yiddish word for Jew. It's what we call ourselves. If Jew haters use the term to refer to people that they hate, they also use the word Jew as a word that has an insulting connotation. And that's why a lot of people in America will not talk about Jews. They will only say the Jewish people. But we are proud to be Jews. I'm proud to be a Jew. I'm proud to be a Yid. And I'm not going to have a word from my heritage, from my background, taken away from me because some people used it pejoratively. So absolutely, I am a Yid. I'm proud to be a Yid. I'll label myself a Yid. And I remember somebody made a shirt like this about 10 years ago, and I guess there was a story about it for the same reason. You're going to wear that on your shirt. And I got that t-shirt back then, and I remembered, and I liked it. So now that I have the wisdom candle design in the Yid, if you're proud to be a Yid, say so loud and proud and bold, right? Enough about that. That's my rant for today. But if anyone has something to say about it, please put it in the comments. I'll be happy to address it later in our question and comments. Okay. I just want to say at the outset, let me take down the mood for 1 second and say that today's learning is dedicated to Harav Adin ben Rivka Leah. That's Rav Steinsaltz, whose elucidation and translation of the Talmud I primarily use and teach to you. I've met him. I've interviewed Rav Steinsaltz. He's really, perhaps the greatest scholar, the greatest Torah scholar of the last 1,000 years. We heard today from his son, Meni, in Yerushalayim, that his father is not well. It's not COVID, it's pneumonia, but he's quite senior in age. And we are praying that we should only hear good news, that God should grant him a refuah shlema, a complete healing of body, mind, spirit, a complete healing all around. May we only hear good news about Rav Steinsaltz, and let's say amen. Okay, we are where? We're holding on page 151, Kuf Nun Aleph. We're very close to the end of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 23, and today we'll be discussing, with God's help, Mishnas 4, 5, and 6. This chapter 23 is all about activities that are a little bit too close to business dealings, and we want to stay away from them on Shabbos. But even though some activities are similar to business dealings, aren't really business dealings, the sages have definitely drawn a fence around the Torah to keep us away from any kind of business dealings on Shabbos. Nevertheless, there are some practices that are going to need to be permitted because they serve the business of heaven, or in other words, to help the poor, to help the community, the needs of the community. There are certain things that are going to be allowed, and that's what we have been studying. Okay. Now, yesterday we learned that a person is not permitted to walk to the edge of his Sabbath boundary. This is in a place without an Erev, so wherever his Shabbos domicile is established, he can walk 2,000 cubits away from that domicile, and then he reaches his Sabbath boundary. He shouldn't walk any further than that in that direction. So our sages said a person might be tempted to walk to the edge of the boundary so that as soon as night falls on Saturday night, he's ready to get a jump on, let's say, his competition, to hire some workers. There's going to be a scarcity of workers. He wants to be there to hire them, and he's waiting at the edge of his boundary. And you can see why this is not Shabbostic, right? It definitely it cuts against the grain of the holiness and sanctity and beauty of Shabbos, the spirituality of Shabbos, if we taken ourselves right to the edge of our border so that as soon as Shabbos ends, we can get to work, right? So we don't do that. We don't walk to the edge of our boundary in order to start doing, as soon as Shabbos ends, something that we were prohibited to do during Shabbos. If it's something that we were permitted to do during Shabbos, then we can walk to the boundary so that we can do it after Shabbos ends. But we may go to the boundary to do something that wasn't permitted on Shabbos, but which is going to serve a higher purpose. And in this Mishnah, Mishnah number 4 of chapter 23, we're going to learn that one of those things that serves a higher purpose is the needs of a corpse or of a bride. Right, so these are two events that are incredibly significant and important in any culture. It's not that Judaism has a lock on that, but we see how the sages address the needs of the dead. I mean, we'll just go so far out of our way to make sure that the vessel, which was the vehicle for the soul during its journey on earth, the body, Now that the soul has moved back, has returned to the world of souls, we're still going to treat the body with the utmost dignity. That's why we bury a body within 24 hours if possible. In Israel, they even try to bury on the same day, like within that same, the same day, not even by the next day. So we can go to the boundary to take care of the needs of the corpse, or for a bride, right? So in other words, that a young couple's getting married, and there's things that we can do at the end of Shabbos that are going to help them have the wedding that they should have, that they deserve to have, to get their life together started in great joy. Let's say there's going to be a Sunday wedding, a very common day for Jewish weddings, and let's make sure that they have everything that they need. Now, on the topic of attending to the needs of the corpse, and we're going to talk a lot about that in today's daf. So let's say that, so back then, apparently in Talmudic times, flutes were often brought for the funeral procession and to be played, I guess maybe like a kind of a soft dirge, while not only like during the funeral and even when people are eulogizing. I guess it was something that they did back then. So let's say there was no flute available and you were actually going to maybe bury after Shabbos ends, right? You're going to wait until that night. There are burials that are done at night. We still see that in Jerusalem today. So let's say there was no flute, but somebody was bringing the flute. Now, a Jew would not be permitted to bring the flute. He couldn't carry that. So for sure, you can't use a flute that a Jew brought. What if a non-Jew brought the flute? Could you go wait by the boundary for the non-Jew to bring that flute so that it would, give dignity to the dead person and it would be part of the eulogy and at the funeral? Answer, yes. But with the caveat that since we cannot ask somebody to do for us that which we are prohibited to do ourselves, if the flute was brought from some distance away from this boundary, so then after Shabbos ends, we would still have to wait the amount of time that it would take for that flute to be brought, so that we're not benefiting from the work that was done on Shabbos, the prohibited work that was done on Shabbos. We would have to wait. Similarly, if, let's say the person dies on Shabbos, and so what do we need now for the funeral? We need a coffin and we need a grave. Now, if somebody wanted to, honor this dead person because, they really cared about him, loved him. Now, if it was a Jew and he dug a grave or constructed a coffin on Shabbos, so he desecrated Shabbos and he did so unnecessarily. So now the person who died we would not use that coffin or that grave for this person. Even if a non-Jew created the coffin or dug the grave for the purposes of this Jew who died on Shabbos, that work shouldn't have been done on Shabbos. It could wait until after Shabbos, so we wouldn't use it. However, if the coffin was built or the grave was dug for some other purpose, right? Just like randomly, like let's say they were going to use it for some non-Jew, and then it turned out that the relatives had had made different arrangements for this non-Jew who died. So now there's a spare coffin and a spare grave lying around. So now the Jew could be buried in that coffin and in that grave because the work was not done specifically for him desecrating Shabbos. It was just done and nobody violated any rule. Non-Jews don't have to observe Shabbos. So certainly they can build a coffin or dig a grave if they like to. And now that the coffin and the grave are there, we can take advantage of it as long as it wasn't done specifically for this Jew who died. And this is similar to a law that we learned in the past with respect to bathhouses, that if water was heated up on Shabbos so that non-Jews could bathe in the bathhouse, then as soon as Shabbos ends, we can go into that bathhouse and enjoy its warm waters. But if the water was heated up for Jews, or for us specifically, then we can't go into it when Shabbos ends. We would have to wait until enough time had passed after Shabbos ends that there would have been enough time to heat up the water after Shabbos, and then we can take advantage of those waters. The principle is the same. If we don't have some reason, if we don't have like some justification for desecrating Shabbos, we're not going to benefit from the fruit of the labor that desecrated Shabbos. That is the principle. Yes, I already covered that. And that brings us to Mishnah number 5. Mishnah number 4 was very short and it was a short discussion. Mishnah number 5. One may perform the needs of the dead on Shabbos. Now, what we've learned, and we learned this much earlier in our journey, I think it was actually in Tractate Brachos. No, it was in Tractate Shabbos, that when King David died, he died on Shabbos. And even though he's a king, his body, his corpse is like any other Jew. It becomes muktzeh. There's no, you can't do anything with a body on Shabbos. You can't bury it. We know we don't have burials on Shabbos, so we just leave the body alone. Now, if there's a reason to move the body, like it's in the sun, and it's going to decompose and it's degrading to the body, so then we'll find a way, like to put a baby or a loaf of bread on top of the body, and the body becomes a base for the permitted object, something that's permitted to touch and to move on Shabbos, a baby or a loaf of bread, and then we can move the body. Or there's some other mechanisms for moving the body from one place to another, just to get it out of the sun. But beyond that, we don't touch the body. We just let it be until after Shabbos. So here in Mishnah number 5, we learn we let the body be in terms of moving it, but we will attend to its needs so that we honor it. What does that mean? We would rinse off the body. We might smear oil on it if that was necessary to sort of help its preservation for that day until it goes into the ground. If the jaw was going to be opening in a way that was going to leave the the mouth opened and then rigor mortis set in and then he's going to be buried with his mouth open, that seems undignified. So you can sort of prop up the jaw so that the mouth will stay closed. And that's permitted to do on Shabbos. But if it's already opened, we can't push it up to close it because that would be violating the muktzeh status, the set aside status of the corpse. We may also take a pillow out from under its head and replace it with something cool, again, to delay the decomposition of the corpse, to honor it on Shabbos. And then while we're learning about some of these practices of attending to the needs of the body, we get a curious little teaching that I'll just read and share with you. And similarly, it says in the verse, this is a verse from Malachi, and I will spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your festival offerings. So this is God speaking to the Jewish people, similar to what Isaiah says, that it's our offerings at a certain point became reprehensible to God, because even though we were pretending to be righteous and holy by bringing offerings in the temple, we were also treating poor people with disdain and violating other laws. And so God found it hypocritical and told the prophet that he found our offerings hypocritical, and then he would just throw them back in our face, essentially. So he's talking about that kind of sentiment. Rav Huna said, and some say that it was Rav Chaga who said, this verse is referring to those people who neglect the words of Torah and turn all of their days into festivals, right? So if you're just living it up all your life and not learning, so then it's impossible to fulfill your mission in this world. Like a certain amount of learning is necessary for everybody. So thank God you're here learning today. Rabbi Yehoshua said, this is what I wanted to read, 3 days after death, the stomach of the dead bursts, right? So that's true. If you don't bury a body, gases form inside the corpse and the stomach distends and it can even burst. And about this, Rabbi Yehoshua says, the stomach of the dead bursts and it falls onto his face and says to him, take what you have put inside me. Now that can be just a general teaching, but when we think about, I feel like I don't always eat healthy enough, for sure, right? Sometimes I feel like for a few days, I just eat the kind of food I really shouldn't be eating. And I start to just feel generally lousy. And I'm like, why was I eating those things and eating late at night and eating food that is heavy and, not eating vegetables and yes, eating spicy, greasy, etc., right? And if you think about that, at the end of your life, your stomach is going to burst. And as it bursts, it's going to say to you, here, take it back, all this junk that you put inside of me. Maybe that will help motivate us to eat properly. That's the end of the Gemara discussing Mishnah number 5. Then we come to Mishnah number 6. One may not shut the eyes of the dead on Shabbos, right? So you can prop open the jaw, like put something under it so it doesn't fall open, but you can't close the eyes of the dead. And that's on Shabbos. And then the same Mishnah teaches that even during the week, we may not shut the eyes of a dying person until the soul has departed the body. You have to know for a fact that the person has died before you step up and close their eyes. And our sages will be somewhat, I don't know if hyperbolic or just emphatic about this. They'll say that a person who closes the eyes of the dead before they're actually dead, it's like committing murder. Why? Because it's similar to a candle or a lamp that is sputtering. You know that it's going to go out very soon, so don't rush it. Just let it end. Right? Don't go and say, well, that lamp is going to go out soon, so I'll just touch the wick and put it out. No. Don't extinguish a life before it leaves this world in its time, especially when we're at the end there. Now, I'm not here to judge people who are dealing with their dead relatives and, they're in that moment of such extreme emotion. People do what they do in that time. Our sages are saying, if you're there at the bedside of a person who's dying, just be there with them and the soul will leave the body. I was there when my grandmother died. I've told the story many times. And when she took that last breath, it was unmistakable. We knew when she had died. And you wait until that moment, and only after that would you step up and close their eyes. Okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel teaches, think about the difference between life and death. He says that for a baby who's 1 day old, right? So this is a baby who has done nothing in this world. He's only been here for 1 day. He hasn't learned anything. He hasn't done anything. He's only been here for a day. He's alive, but he hasn't amounted to anything. He's only been here for a day. But for him or for her, we will desecrate Shabbos. Anything that we need to do, if God forbid this baby's in danger, will violate any law, any Sabbath law that we need to violate in order to save its life. But once we die, even if you're the king of Israel, even if you're the holy King David, once you've died, we will not desecrate Shabbos for you, right? So once a person is gone once a soul has left this world, there is no longer any justification for desecrating Shabbos on behalf of the body of that person, as opposed to the 1 day old baby that we will do anything. And why? It makes perfect sense, of course. Obviously, it's life. We cherish life so much. And specifically, a baby, even though it's 1 day old, if we save its life, think how many Shabbats it will be able to observe and enjoy in this world, in its life, how many mitzvahs it will eventually be able to perform. So, of course, we preserve that opportunity for it. But one who has left this world, a soul who has left this world, so he's freed of his obligations. He can no longer perform mitzvahs. Now, this is considered a sadness for the one who has left this world. And that's why, if we're the type, some people wear the tzitzis out of their shirts, some people tuck them in, some people wear them out so they can see them. But if you wear your tzitzis, your ritual fringes out, and you walk into a cemetery, you have to tuck them in. You have to hide them because it's considered like mocking the ones who are lying there, the bodies who are lying there. And a small portion of the soul rests with the body in the graveyard, even though the vast majority of the soul goes on to the world of souls. So there's something there, and you don't want to mock those bits of soul along with their bodies in the graveyard by fulfilling the mitzvah of wearing ritual fringes, tzitzis, which they cannot do. The dead cannot perform mitzvahs. So now that we've mentioned this, okay, we're going to come back around to that in 1 second. We're just going to cut a couple more observations about the live one versus the dead one. The sages will teach that, the power of life, like even this 1 day old baby, a mouse will not dare to approach that baby. It will run away from the baby, even though it's a 1 day old baby. It's completely helpless, but a mouse won't go up to it. But even the great king of Israel, King David, once he's dead, the mouse, if the body's left there alone, the mouse will have no compunction about going up to it, and gnawing at the corpse. So once we're dead, it's just a completely different state. I mean, it goes without saying, but they're saying it. So while we're teaching about what is possible to do and to not do, and which will an animal attack a body? One sage says an animal won't attack a body unless it's dead. But we know that's not true, and the sages say so. What are you talking about? There are lions who attack people all the time. Well, they're only going to attack in certain situations and not others. It's a list of teachings. I'm not going to go into it right now. But in that list, it's mentioned, and this is the first time we encounter it in the Talmud, Lilith. So Lilith, I believe, is mentioned 5 times in the Talmud. This is the first time. Rabbi Hanina said, it is prohibited to sleep alone in a house, and anyone who sleeps alone in a house will be seized by the evil spirit Lilith. Now, it's important to note immediately that there is no single interpretation in Judaism of who and what Lilith was or is. There are many stories, legends, explanations. In modern times, there's a sort of feminist reading that this patriarchal society used this feminine evil spirit as a way of putting down and controlling women, and so to sort of take back identity. There've been organizations that sort of brand themselves Lilith, right? That's an interesting modern read, but it is pretty universally accepted in Jewish tradition that Lilith represents evil. So that's not something you really want to associate yourself with. Where does that evil come from? Rav Steinsaltz doesn't comment except to say in his elucidation that Lilith is an evil spirit. The Art Scroll Talmud mentions that Lilith is the mother of all demons. I read up a little bit about it. Some sources will say that Lilith was Adam's first wife, because in the book of Genesis, there's actually sort of 2 creation accounts. He created the male and female, and that's like one story, and then he caused his sleep to come upon the man and removed from his side and built woman, and that was, Adam and Eve. But that first story, maybe it was a different woman, a different person, and so there's some sources that will assign Lilith to that one. But this idea that you wouldn't want to sleep alone in a house because, and now don't focus so much on Lilith or the identity of Lilith, but the idea that evil could overcome you if you're alone. Now, I don't think this teaching is saying so much, hey, you can't live alone in an apartment. You can't, that it's dangerous anytime you go to bed and you're alone in a dwelling. It's certainly not going that far. But what's interesting here is what Rav Steinsaltz says about it in his comment. Let me get that in front of me. And he says, where is it? It is prohibited to sleep alone in a house. Some commentaries explain that this prohibition is based on the principle that one may not place oneself in a dangerous situation. Perhaps one who is alone will be gripped with fear and will be traumatized. So, this is a kind of a good general teaching. Number one, don't put yourself in danger. The sages are quite risk averse when it comes to physical danger for ourselves. We are instructed, right? It is a mitzvah to avoid putting oneself in danger. There's a lot of reasons. Obviously, there's the sanctity of life and protecting life. From the sage's perspective, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where a miracle is going to be required in order to save our lives. I mean, it's great if that miracle should happen, but we don't want to ever be somewhere in such a situation where we need a miracle in order to remain alive. Also, this idea of isolation, especially we see that today, right? Isolation is very dangerous. If possible, you've just got to make sure, our lives change, we have a community, we have family, and then we move or they move, people die, there's divorce, things change, and or we're embarrassed, we're humiliated, we lose work, etc. And we start to isolate and to isolate ourselves. And it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to isolate from society and from community. A lot of bad things can happen in those situations. We become more vulnerable to all kinds of dangers, of spiritual, mental, physical dangers when we're not in some kind of community. This is the importance of community. Okay. Excuse me. So then the sages are wondering, is it actually so that when we die, the obligation to perform mitzvahs is gone forever? Is that true? So the challenge is brought because we believe there's going to be a Messianic Age. And in the Messianic Age, the dead will be resurrected. So everyone is going to come back. And when we come back in the Messianic Age, right, and so everybody who has a role and a place in that world is going to return. Some people will have lost that, but that's rare. Most people will return, and they will have a role to play in that world. If you think that everybody who ever died is coming back, with some exceptions, where are all those people going to go? No problem. Then the world's true spiritual nature is going to be revealed, and God will make as much room as is needed at that time. Because in the Messianic Age, the physicality, the firmness, the unyielding, realness of this world will be exposed for what it is, an illusion. Will be spiritual selves in a spiritual world, and yet we will have physical bodies. And so when we return in that time, we always are praying that the temple will be restored. Why do we want the temple to be restored? So that we can bring offerings in the temple and fulfill the commandments that we're unable to fulfill now when the temple is not standing. So who's going to be fulfilling that? Is it only the ones who happen to be alive at the time that the Messianic Age starts, and not all the ones from history who are resurrected? And this is saying, no, of course those people are going to get to do it also. So when the body and soul are reunited in this world in the Messianic Age, we will be able to perform mitzvahs. And in fact, that world will look largely like this world. There will even be poor people in that world. What there won't be is war, and there won't be disease, terrible disease. There won't be any pandemics. The presence of God will be as revealed and open and filling the world as water fills the sea. There will be nations. Somebody asked me this the other day. Is it that everyone is going to be a subject of the Jewish king, the Messiah, who is going to be ruling in Jerusalem? Answer, no. There will be nations in the world, and they will seek the counsel of the Jewish king in Jerusalem. Now, there are a lot of different versions of what the Messianic Age is going to look like, and of course we don't know for sure, but what I just said is pretty well accepted sort of standard eschatological doctrine within Judaism. Yes, and Shmuel is the one who says that the age of Mashiach, the Messianic time, will be like other times, and that the poor will still be there within the land. And finally, before I get to your comments and questions, I want to read just a small little passage that's so beautiful. And for sure, other cultures have very similar teachings. The wheel of fortune, right? The wheel of fortune. When you're up and you're down. So here it is in Judaism. It was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says, a person should always request divine mercy with regard to the condition of poverty, for if he does not come to a state of poverty, his son will. And if his son does not come to such a state, his grandson will. For as it is stated, quote, you shall surely give him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, to the poor. For due to this thing, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you put your hand toward. That's the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 15, verse 10. With regard to this verse, the Tana, the rabbi from the school of Rabbi Yishmael, taught, due to this thing means that it is a wheel, a galgal, that turns in the world, upon which people continuously rise and fall. Rav Yosef said, we hold that a Torah scholar will not become poor, but the Gemara challenges this statement immediately, but we see that they do become poor. And the Gemara answers, even so, if there's a Torah scholar who becomes poor, he will never have to go around asking for charity at people's doors, because perhaps he'll live so frugally that it won't come to that, or because people will want to support him in his learning. So maybe he won't be fully subject to that wheel, right? But everyone else who's not a full-time professional Torah scholar had better take this seriously. We could be riding high today. We could be shot down tomorrow. Riding high in May, shot down in June, as Frank Sinatra sung. Rav Steinsaltz comments, let's finish the second paragraph. In a similar vein, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Chiya said to his wife, when a poor person comes to the house, be quick to give him bread, so that they will be quick to give bread to your children. She said to him, are you cursing them, your children? Are you letting words come out of your mouth that our children are going to end up poor? He said to her, it is a verse that it is written, as it says, do to this thing. And the sages expounded that it is a wheel that continuously turns in the world. And similarly, it was taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, says. The verse that states, and he will show you mercy and have compassion on you and multiply you, Deuteronomy 13:18, teaches us that anyone who has compassion for God's creatures will receive compassion from heaven. And anyone who does not have compassion for God's creatures will not receive compassion from heaven. And on this sugya, this teaching, Rav Steinsaltz writes, anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, God acts with compassion toward one who has compassion on the poor. One should constantly be aware that he is seeking his sustenance from God, and just as he hopes that God will answer his own prayers, he should be receptive to the requests of the poor. It is therefore customary to give charity before prayer. And that's why every synagogue and every home of an observant Jewish person has a tzedakah box, a charity box. And I have one over here, and every morning I pray in this room. I mean, during COVID, normally I would be in synagogue, but since the pandemic, I pray in this room every morning. And when I put on my prayer shawl, and I go to take out my tefillin, and in my tefillin I keep some money, so that immediately I go put money in the tzedakah box, in the charity box. And this is the source of that tradition, that we give to charity immediately before prayer. We want to show heaven that we care about all of God's creatures, that we care about the business of heaven, and we know, and this is the first part of this teaching, just because you're comfortable and you're well off and things are going well, don't neglect to pray for your financial well-being. That's a two-parter. That means be grateful for everything you have and pray that it should continue if things are good. And if things are bad, for sure pray that things will get better. And don't think to yourself, well, prayer is all about spirituality and coming close to God, and I don't want to, get into the sordid discussion of my money situation. I don't want to think or talk about money when I'm praying. That's only for spiritual subjects. No, because you have to recognize that everything we have in this world, any money we have, any food that we're eating, sure, we work and we earn it, but the opportunity to work and to earn, whatever our situation is, no matter how great or how challenging in the moment, it's all designed by God for us. And we should be thankful for what we have, and we should pray that it should continue if it's good, and that should improve if it's challenged. And we should always, in fact, pray that it should improve more, unless we're so crazy rich, because if you've already set up that you're going to tithe regularly, right, that 10% of all your income is going to go out to charity, so then you should always pray that you get more income, that you should have more parnasa, more livelihood, so that you can be generous and it can flow through you and give to the needy. And if you're super rich and you have more than you would ever need, so then you should give more than 10% and make sure that you're always involved in charity. And so what did we learn today? Pray for your livelihood and give to charity right before you pray. Put a few coins or $1 into the tzedakah box. If you don't have a tzedakah box, a charity box, start one immediately. And you must be giving to charity every day, regular basis. That's important training for your body and soul. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check comments and questions. Ooh, there's a lot of them. Whoa. Okay. Bill Eldridge, shalom from St. Louis. I'm traveling home to look after my grandmother. Yes, we prayed for you. And Bill, we should only hear good news about your grandmother. We are definitely praying for her complete, speedy recovery. Vaughn Billow, where is the best place to buy my own copy of the Talmud? Online. You can order it online. Art Scroll is one version, Art Scroll Publishers, or Koren is the other one. I have both. This is the Art Scroll, which has a lot more commentary on every page from different sources, and this is the Koren, which is primarily Rav Steinsaltz's elucidation. But it's definitely easier to read. It's simpler, it's more direct, and it includes, every time there's an open question, like what is the law? And you want to know, well, what is the law that I need to follow today after the sages argued back and forth? In his notes, he has it. Plus, there's also a lot of illustrations and pictures. It's very expensive to have a complete Talmud. But it's free online to go to sefaria.org, and you can read the Talmud anytime. If you want to have a full set at home, you really should look at both and see which one speaks to you if you must choose between one or the other. But it's quite expensive to have a whole set of Talmud. Okay. Sharon Frant Brooks. Watching by candlelight on my phone. Storm knocked out the power here in Lebanon, New Jersey. Wow, Sharon, we honor your dedication to learning. You're learning by candlelight. That's old school. That's beautiful. Like you could really feel like you're plugging in like in the old days. And you should have your power back as soon as possible. May you be blessed to be safe in that challenging time, and that the storm should not hurt anybody in your world. Bill Eldridge, but supposing the flute was being brought by a non-Jewish friend of the deceased because the friend simply wanted to play a tune for their friend's burial, is the wait still necessary? The non-Jewish friend was going to bring it regardless of whether they were asked or not. See, that's perfect. You understand the principle, Bill. He was doing it to serve his own needs. And so I think then it's covered. I think he brought it to play himself. If he does play it and then he lends it to somebody else to play it, I think that works. He was going to bring it for himself, but then he says, oh, we'll take it and you eulogize the dead with it. It seems like that should work, but it doesn't. I think they're still going to ask from how far away did he bring it? And if it's too far, they're going to have to put a little more thought into how they're going to deal with that. Robin Sneed, funerals are so difficult now. In Seattle, we stand vigil, sit Shiva for our past homeless people every month. It's one of the great tragedies of COVID, that a lot of people died, a lot of senior citizens died, and their families were not able to mourn properly. They didn't have Shiva. They couldn't have the support of the community coming into their home at their most vulnerable time. I'm very blessed. Both my parents are alive. But when Nina's dad left this world, and we just loved him so much, and it was really, really difficult on the family. And then when we returned from the funeral back east and we were here in LA, and our community really came out for Nina and was just so helpful. And she just commented many times what a beautiful experience that was. And our hearts go out to people who've lost loved ones during the pandemic and were not able to enjoy a proper Shiva. Sharon Frant Brooks, my father of blessed memory passed away on Shabbat. I found him in his home between Shabbat morning and Mincha, the afternoon prayer. The state required removal, and the funeral home people removed the body. 2 rabbis with me and approved. Listen, what could you do? I mean, for sure. We have a very important principle that the law of the land is the law, right? So as long as it's not going to lead us to commit some kind of a crime like idolatry, we submit to the law of the land, even when it's in conflict with what we might otherwise do halachically. In those situations, it's very important, and just as you did, to consult with a rabbi, because they may have other ideas that we wouldn't have thought of. And any difficult situation in life, if possible, consult with a rabbi. And I'm so sorry that you lost your dad. May his memory always be for a blessing, Sharon. PK Sakara says, just coming on, the dictionary says yid is a slang word and is to be avoided. I know. It has had pejorative meanings in the past. There are anti-Semites and Jew haters who use the word yid negatively and as an insult. But why should I allow them to remove what I call myself from my vocabulary? I will not cede a word from my background, particularly the word in Yiddish that describes me as a Jew, and say, well, no, I won't use that word because other people have used it negatively. It was interesting when I did a little research on this after this person, told me that she was offended. And I learned, anybody who's with us from England has probably heard about this. I had never heard this. That one of the major sports teams in England, the soccer team, Tottenham Hotspur, I guess the neighborhood or the part of England where that team plays has historic ties to the Jewish community. And so, fans of other soccer clubs started making fun of the fans of the Tottenham Hotspurs as Yids, calling them Yids very negatively as an insult. Well, then the fans took it as a badge of honor. And I guess many, many non-Jewish fans of Tottenham Hotspur call themselves Yid Army and even have t-shirts with a big Jewish star, and they call themselves Yid Army. It's problematic because then they go to away games and the fans shout terrible anti-Semitic things. I mean, I don't even know what to make of that. I'm not commenting on that. I don't know what to make of that. I have to think that through more. But the fact is, here, in our world, especially in the observant Haredi Jewish world, in a Hasidic shul, in a modern Orthodox shul, we call ourselves Yidden all the time. The song that I played during the opening credits, Moshe Storch was singing Geschmack to be a Yid, right? It's sweet, it's tasty to be a Yid. We're privileged, we're blessed to be Jews. We're not going to walk around with our heads low and not call ourselves what we call ourselves because anti-Semites tried to colonize our language. No, we refuse. Next, Vaughn Billow, about the closing the eyes of the dead. If one died on Friday and the body needed to be prepped, I guess, for burial, would they in ancient times close eyes before wrapping the body and placing in the tomb? Yeah, so during the week, yes, they would close the eyes, but making sure that the person had in fact died, right? That the soul had left and for sure they took the last breath, the person has died. Then they would close the eyes, and then they don't wrap the body, they put burial shrouds on it, which is similar to what we wear on Yom Kippur and at the Seder on Passover, called a kittel, which is just a very simple white garment. And no matter how poor you are or how rich you are, you wear the same simple white linen shroud, and you get buried in a plain wood box. No fancy lead-lined, shiny coffins. That's prohibited in our tradition. Bill, don't sleep alone in a house if we don't want Lilith to get us. As a bachelor, I'm going to want some clarification on that. Well, I clarified a little as I was teaching it. Barbara Bell, so many rules. If we are not knowledgeable but are respectful, can the dead be honored in their faith? Is there retroactive observance for the dead who were observant but passed without ritual or appropriate observance? Absolutely. One of the questions that comes up all the time is, we know a Jew is not supposed to be cremated, right? So that's a very firm teaching. In the Jewish tradition, we don't cremate a body because of the things we've talked about of honoring the vessel that carried the soul in this world. Well, in the Holocaust, tragically, right, millions were murdered by the Nazis, and generally their bodies were just burnt up in crematoria, so they didn't receive the proper burial that they should have had. Are they somehow deficient in the next world? And the answer is no, absolutely not. They were martyred. So there's the optimal that we try to do and that the law says we do, and if it's in our power to do it, we do it. But What we can do for the dead in this world is actually very powerful. If there's someone you care about who has died, you can help them in their journey in the world of souls by doing mitzvahs and good deeds in their honor in this world. In other words, if there's something you want to honor them, so okay, I'm going to give to this cause that I really believe in because I want to honor the dead, and I wouldn't have given if it wasn't to honor that person. So now they, through you, they were able to perform a mitzvah. See, because they're gone, but because you're doing it in their honor, it's like they get the credit for that in the next world, and it's a great merit for them in the world to come, to have people who care about them so much in this world that they're performing good deeds in their name. That's a huge thing that we can do for the dearly departed. Yes, riding high in April, shot down in May. Thank you. Debbie Meller says, Rambam says that prayer is a progression in the human star to communicate with our korbanot, which he sees as a compromise to the historical time period the Torah was devised in. So why would we regress by going back to the korbanot? Many rabbis do not see as desirable or the intent of the mitzvah. So Debbie's asking about the offerings that were brought in the temple. And you know, some people will say that Maimonides said that, you know, the animal offerings, animal sacrifices made sense in the ancient world when everybody was doing animal sacrifices. That was the primary form of religious worship throughout the world. And the Jews came with, you know, and obeying the Torah, were directing all those animal sacrifices in a very strict and rigid and codified system, and always to one God, the God, to God. And so that was a kind of, you know, a weaning away from ancient and unnecessary animal sacrifice. And so once the temple was destroyed, you know, that was it. That was the end of animal sacrifice in the world. And why would we ever want to go back to it? This is what Debbie's asking. It's a great question. But the Torah is eternal. And the Torah says that we should be bringing offerings in the temple. So we're not going to try to bring any animal sacrifices until God's presence is completely manifest in the world. The Messiah has come, totally changed the world, and then he'll let us know, does God want us to do those sacrifices or not? You know, so we don't really have to, you know, there's no point in arguing about it because we'll know what to do then. We can't know for sure. But until we're told not to, we believe that every law was given for a reason and that every law is eternal. Okay, moving on. Lynn says, Torah protects one from poverty. Even if he becomes poor, he will not come to the indignity of begging. Really hanging on to that one. May we all so benefit. Absolutely. That the sages said it here on this page. It's no guarantee that we're going to be rich. But if we're studious people, we won't get to the point, you know, where we're homeless and begging in the street. We heard it here tonight. And finally, Lynn says, yes, I put in a coin in my charity box in the morning prayers. USA is said to be missing much coinage all of a sudden. Oh, I hadn't heard that. My first thought, oh no, this physicality is where we do so much mitzvahs, and these actions are dear. I mean, I don't think we're going to run out of coins and the need to, and the ability to put coins in a charity box. But, you know what? If that may be something to check in with people. There may be people who are stuck at home. They can't get out. They're having everything delivered. Yeah, I have friends like this. They're older. They're definitely from Yidden, right? They're religious Jews. He's a rabbi. He's praying at home. He gets all his groceries delivered. He's taking very good care of himself so that he shouldn't go out there and catch COVID. And I know he gives money to tzedakah when he davens. Maybe he's having a problem with coinage. I mean, listen, what you can certainly do, it's no problem. You put coins in the tzedakah box. When you run out of coins, count what's in there, replace it with cash, or even make an online donation, and then put the coins back in a jar where they can go back into the charity box day by day. That's how you handle that situation. But maybe I should check in and say, by any chance, do you need coins? I'd be happy to get them for you. It's a great idea, Lynn. All right, my friends, it's been great learning with you today. Our takeaway is to always be praying and be grateful for and praying for the continuation of our livelihood, and to make sure that we are treating all of God's creatures with compassion so that we will merit to receive compassion from heaven. All the best, and may we merit to learn again tomorrow.